Chris, we've been pretty busy this fall with conferences and professional development. And today I wanted to have a candid conversation about our most recent EDUCAUSE visit. So we had an EDUCAUSE conference.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It was a great time. I think this is like the third or fourth time I've gone to EDUCAUSE. Can you help our listeners understand what EDUCAUSE is?
Yes. So EDUCAUSE is a nonprofit association that is dealing with leading and advancing strategically with technology, but they specifically focus on higher education. So they had a most recent annual conference in San Antonio, Texas, but they also had an online conference 2 or 3 weeks after that.
I really enjoyed the conference this year, Candice. What were your takeaways?
My takeaways. So, well, it started off, John, the president of EDUCAUSE, talked about how EDUCAUSE is a community-inspired impact. That was it? Was it community-inspired impact?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so the reason why I like that he started off with community inspired is EDUCAUSE is more than just those events. So it's not just, oh, you show up in San Antonio, you learn a couple things, you go home and wait for next year to roll around. But there are community groups, there's listservs, there's toolkits, there's all these things that come from all of the institutions, all of the different higher education institutions. And I like that he mentioned that, because sometimes you go to a conference and you're recharge that battery and then you go, well, that was great. And then you forget about it. So I appreciate that he started off with that. But one other thing that I really loved is that they gave recognition and awards at the beginning of the event. So when we kicked off, they came out and they get these peer nominated rewards and recognitions. And so they got to really give people their flowers before we got underway. So speaking of giving people their flowers and recognition, I want to take this time to acknowledge Bob Dignant.
Yeah. Bob is amazing. He's been the producer behind our podcast here at the Center for Innovation and Teaching and Learning at the University of Illinois. We have been remiss to have not acknowledged him up to this point. He's doing a great job helping us in the studio here, doing all the recording, and then giving me a perfectly formatted editing set of files for me to do the final production on this. So we're really appreciative of the work that Bob has done for us, and also the support that CITL has provided us.
Yes. So yes, we got that off of our plate. However, there were lots of other takeaways. They had inspiring keynotes that were there. And one was a big name, Brené Brown. Other people may be familiar with Dr. Brené Brown. She gave a keynote, had a fireside conversation with our president. Did you have takeaways from that?
Yeah, and I want to tell a little story first, because Brené Brown is one of my favorites. I think we've talked about how her book, Daring Greatly, really impacted my career and sort of how I view leadership. And so I got there really early for the keynote. I'm like, I'm going to be in the front row, and the front row unfortunately was reserved. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be in the second row, and I placed myself right in front of the podium. And then I looked down and it said, fireside chat. I'm like, oh, wait, fireside chat. That means over there by those 2 chairs on the other side of the stage. So I moved myself over to the other side just so I could get that nice perch. And it really was, I think it was a really amazing talk. And I don't know that there was necessarily a central theme. It was more conversation based. And there were just so many things that kind of came out of it, little quotes that she came up with.
Go ahead and share one or two. So
like, I'm going to start with one. And one of the things I think I realized about Brené Brown that maybe I didn't realize before is like, I don't know that she necessarily cares what people think about her, because she's just like authentically herself. And
she is, but she does care what people think about her, or there would have been recordings of her.
Oh, that's true. She did sort of prohibit us from recording any of this. So she is definitely controlling the message that she's putting out there. But I think that she was in her native Texas. Mm-hmm. We were in San Antonio. And I think she just felt really comfortable.
I agree.
And so she cursed, and she just kind of laid it out there. And one of the things that I think she hit on that really resonated with me is she was calling out higher ed a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think we in some ways need to be called out a lot. And I think we can be kind of high and mighty and kind of sit in the ivory tower. And she was more about, hey, let's actually talk to the people that we're trying to serve. And one of the things was, she says, to be better humans, and we need to understand the stories of people sitting in the classrooms. And anything stuck out to you about that?
That was a specific quote that I really wrote down because I was like, oh, yes. And then it was interesting to me because later on when she answered some questions, she contradicted what she had said, even though she said the people that don't have power, let's listen to their stories and their experiences and how important and impactful that is. However, there was a question during the Q&A where they asked, young people. So you have all these different community groups or infinity groups. And young people said, oh, what do you have to tell young people? And she was like, I don't have anything to tell young people. I'm not young anymore. That's not the audience that I go. I just talk about my experience. That's what I can do, which I'm like, valid. However, then they said, well, what about, the women that you're inspiring? She was like, I wouldn't write a book differently for women that I would for anybody else because it's just leadership, which again, valid points. However, there's something about representation that's very important. And sometimes when you don't understand that your experiences is not a monolith, but you and what you bring is very important. And so it kind of diminished the fact that she was like, oh, well, I wouldn't write it any differently, which no, you may be giving the same points, but because it's coming from you, it is going to be inherently more impactful to some people that can resonate with that story, and they can't resonate with that story with other people.
Yeah, and it's interesting that she would take that approach because she talks so much about her experience as a woman, as a non-traditional student going through to the point where she got her PhD.
Yeah.
She used that one phrase, pale male Yale, to sort of describe the Ivy League persona. And she also talked about how some faculty were just absolutely awful to her as she went through the thing.
Yeah, she gave props to staff and professional staff. She said how hardworking they were, and she appreciated having those people around her. And so I do understand that there were lots of tidbits. One thing that there was a question she mentioned, and I might misquote it, which is fine. And it says, do you have to wear armor to work? And so I remember that phrase, and it resonated with me a lot because there was a job in particular that I had years ago where it was like, I felt like I had to always suit up and get ready to encounter these battles just to make it through the day. And when I had to do that, I would get home just exhausted. And I was like, time for a new job because this is not what I want to do.
I think the phrase that she used that really stuck out was, is wearing armor rewarded or required?
Yes, that was it.
And that was like, whoa, that's so powerful, because sometimes it is good for us to wear armor and to go into battle and fight for those things we need to fight for. But if you have to wear that armor every single day to survive in an organization, it's not healthy.
Hot, sweaty, and
that's right. That's right. And now the whole world is imagining us in chainmail. Right.
So there are other things that happened at the conference, but were there any other Brené Brown takeaways that you wanted to highlight or mention?
I think a couple things that she said. One is, and this I mentioned that she cursed, so I'm gonna quote her. I don't normally curse in the podcast, but
everyone, earmuffs ready.
Yeah. So she was talking about how we need to demand good behavior of everybody in the academy, and her quote was, I don't give a shit how smart you are if you're not fit for human consumption.
Oh, I do remember that. I didn't write it down because, well, I remember it. But yes, I resonated, and then a vision came to my mind of a person.
Exactly. We all know that person in the academy that is just so full of themselves and just not a very good human, but gets revered because of their academic prowess. And that's the thing that, we can get into this a little bit later, but there are other conversations that I was at the conference talking about how higher ed is really in this sort of crisis mode now, and we've lost the trust of society in some ways. And I think part of that is that we can get holier than thou. We can get too high and mighty about like what the academy is and how important it is without actually connecting with real people.
And so how do we bridge that gap? Like, that's the question that we're still standing with. How are we doing that? And we may have another podcast where we talk specifically about it, but
yeah, absolutely. The other thing that Brené Brown brought up, and I think was maybe a theme that I saw in some of the other talks, was she said, we are changing the world by changing students.
Yep.
And I think that that's something that really hit me deeply, because I have this belief in, I think I've said this, I may have said this at our, in the live session, but I really do think that universities are going to be a place where we solve some of these like really divisive societal problems. Mm-hmm. And to do that, we need to make sure that we are preparing students to go out in the world and help solve some of these problems in an open-minded way.
I agree. When I think about my high school self or a young person coming into college, and they don't have to be young, just how your mind has changed, or how you have to grapple with new concepts for the first time. You're like, oh, of course I know this book. I read it day in and day out. And then someone asks you a question. I go, oh, wait, the author was what? They had what experience? And then it changes my perspective on how I take the literature or how I take the text. And so, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of talk in society today about like universities brainwashing kids. And that's not what it is. It's actually opening their minds. It's exposing them to new information, to new types of people with different lived experiences. And that tends to make people more open-minded and open to different experiences. It's
like, you changed as soon as you went to college. I just got experience to more.
Yeah.
And so.
No, I mean, I had the same experience in going to college. I grew up in a really metropolitan area that was really diverse. And we've talked about how that sort of impacted me. And I went to what was a relatively conservative religious institution for my undergrad, but it still expanded how I saw the world.
Yep. So there are other things that I took away from EDUCAUSE, and one of the things that I appreciated, I got to present both on the online format, but in person. So I got to present with a colleague from Berkeley, and we had never met in person before, but we are co-leads for community group. Our community group is IT governance. So we decided to submit a proposal about, IT governance and how that works at your campus, and let's get this community group going. And so it was wonderful to be able to present with a peer at a different institution. We have completely different institution types, the way that our governance work, we're governance with a little g. They actually have governance, all of those things, and to have that conversation with so many people in the room. It was also rewarding when we were giving the speech. People came in, and I recognized people over the years, whether they were in my leadership cohort or a previous EDUCAUSE, or just that online discussion person that always sits in the Zoom and we like chat back and forth. So seeing those people in person was very impactful. I got to show how it's much bigger than just one institution, and we got to share, like, we're talking with people from Harvard or Notre Dame or all those various places, so they name dropped you as well. So
the networking piece of this is so valuable. And I don't know if you struggle with this too, but one of the things I struggle with is I will have met somebody before and they're walking up to me and I'm like, I have no idea what your name is. Like trying to I always want to yell at the conference organizers. I'm like,
make the name
tags bigger so I can see who's coming at me.
I definitely will remember faces, and I'm actually good with mnemonic devices. So if you tell me your name once, the rest of the day or the rest of that week, I've got you. However, I'm not shy of saying, I forgot your name, and asking for them to, I'm like, we met last time, in Denver, Boulder, Colorado, and we were at the thing. They're like, oh yeah, please remind me of your name. And then
I wish I could do that. I still haven't mastered that art of just admitting that I forgot your name.
Well, I can only say friend so many times before they realize that I don't know what their name is.
I normally wait for someone else I know to come up, and I introduce that person to them and then let them say their name. Yeah.
And then I have missed it. I was like, what
did they say?
What did they just
say? So, but yeah, I'm really glad you got that opportunity to kind of experience the community of after the conference, I ended up doing a panel session in the EdTech community group from EDUCAUSE, which I had never been involved in before. Somebody asked me to stand in for them. And it was a great experience. It was a group of like 20 people, and we just had a great conversation about AI and how it's coming into educational technology. I
also got to present to the online format. So the online format was a couple weeks afterwards, and I presented with other colleagues on our campus about the Women in Technology group and how our Infinity group is empowering others and doing other things. But it was a new format. So we pre-recorded the session, and it was played for people to watch in real time and give feedback as they watched it. So they would watch the recording.
How did that go?
It was different. I mean, people were giving feedback, but it was weird. So you watch yourself, you watch the whole video, and then people that might have questions in the chat would go, oh, what about this? Or a question about this? And they were there for like 30 minutes afterwards to just have anybody that was presenting answer questions. So it was interesting because they can keep going back and watching it, and you can look and ask questions, but it was different because
yeah,
it was very much like, here's our prepackaged what we're going to say. If you have any questions, don't ask them. Actually, no, ask them in the chat. But
it's sort of out of body because you're watching yourself and watching people comment on you.
Yeah, so it was interesting. Were there other events or things that you did at EDUCAUSE that were takeaways or you want to share?
So I have to admit that because we're doing this podcast and there were 2 sessions that were actually live podcast recordings, and it was prior to when we did our live. And so I kind of wanted to see how they did it. And the topic was interesting too. Oh. And one of them was a discussion about the EDUCAUSE top 10, which we haven't talked about yet.
We haven't.
And we can talk
top 11.
We can talk a little bit. Yeah, it was like there was a tie for 10th, so it really was top 11, wasn't it?
Second year.
So every year EDUCAUSE releases what they consider the top 10 issues in higher ed IT. And there's a big keynote presentation about it. They put it's a hugely produced
infographics,
everything. All that kind of stuff. It's always really impressive. But they had a session afterwards where they were talking about the top 10 and kind of diving in a little bit more deeply in a more informal way, but they recorded it as a podcast. And so I got to go in there and kind of see how they did a live podcast. And, but it was the issue that I think were talking about that was really interesting to me is the kind of the overall theme in the top 10 that the universities are challenged right now to be competent and caring at the same time. Yep. And so, and they frame that as a way to sort of win back trust from the general public. As we've talked about before, it's no secret that higher ed has a bit of a trust issue out there. There's a lot of people that are saying, is it worth the cost? We were talking about before, some people think that where we are is like a brainwashing factory, which I don't believe, but it's out there as a sentiment, and that there's student debt is a huge thing. Even students who don't finish, like if you get 3/4 of the way through your degree, you spend all this money, you still owe money even though you don't have the degree. And so they talked about this idea of we need to kind of reprove our competence and our usefulness to society, as well as being this sort of caring institution that is caring for our students, that's caring for our faculty and staff. So I thought that was an interesting framing.
Yes, and how can you be both to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, interesting conversation. So I will say that EDUCAUSE in general has been a great way to professionally develop myself. I've been going for decades. I talked about in my keynote how when I went to one of my first EDUCAUSEs, it was like 16 plus years ago. Yeah. But were there any other things that you would mention for those that don't get to do this or don't get to often travel and or experience that you just need to share?
Yeah, that's a great question, Candice. I think it's this going and doing these types of things. And early in my career, I really didn't do many of these types of things. And more recently, I've had the organizational resources to do it and the ability, the time to travel and that sort of thing. But I think it really it connects you with this larger community. You were talking about community before, but when you walk into, whether it's the vendor floor at EDUCAUSE or you walk into one of the general keynote sessions, you look around and you realize there are so many people that are doing the same stuff that we were doing, right? And it feels less isolating. I think sometimes our jobs can be like, oh, we are trying to solve all of these problems all ourselves. And then you look around and there's thousands of people in that room that they're doing the same thing. They're solving the same problems. And that was actually one of the things that came out in one of the panels that I listened to was, don't try to solve problems that somebody else has already solved. And there's this kind of interesting, if you look at higher ed, you could see us like individual institutions as competitive with each other. And I think to a certain extent we
Somewhat.
are, right?
Yeah,
We're
there's rankings.
We're competing, there's rankings, we're competing for the same research dollars, we're competing for the same students. But something like EDUCAUSE brings us together in this collaborative sense and realizing like it's better if everyone raises, if all of higher
lifting
ed,
all boats.
that really works.
I think the quote that I'm reminded of instead of lifting all boats was lifting others as you lead. And I think that is something that you have to remember is that as a leader, how can we still bring other people with me? And that's one of the things that I think I'm still struggling with in terms of EDUCAUSE. So reminding other people like, hey, this opportunity, this is those benefits. They can see what I get out of it and I can share that impact. That's why I keep going. I keep saying, hey, here's all the benefits. And they go, sure, spend our money. However, to get other people on board and being able to bring them along is something I'm still struggling with.
Yeah, that's actually that's an interesting comment because I've always struggled with who else on my team should I give the opportunity to go to EDUCAUSE, because I've always viewed EDUCAUSE as more leadership oriented, and because there's not really there aren't a lot of technical. There are very few technical.
Not at the annual
sessions.
conference,
and,
right?
And so, but I think it's important for people as they're growing in their careers to sort of see these big issues, right? They may not have strategy as one of the things in their job description, but if they can start understanding the bigger picture, I think that's one of the things that EDUCAUSE does so well is it's less an IT conference and more a strategic leadership conference about IT. It has an IT focus, it has a higher ed focus, but it really is about how do we think about the big strategic issues, and then there is a technology lens of how do we use technology to solve these things.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that because it reminds me of when I do send things over to my team, I'm sending them, here's an online toolkit that you can use. Here's a community group that you can go to. Here's a monthly online session you can go to. And it's still utilizing that whole EDUCAUSE community inspired impact, but they may not go to San Antonio and walk around, but they can still get something from it. So
one of the challenges of going to a conference like EDUCAUSE is they present these top 10 issues and you look at them and go, those are so overwhelming. There's so many things that we could do to address the issues that they're proposing as the top issues in IT for us and in higher ed. And I think that one of the quotes that somebody on one of the panels said was, if you try to boil the ocean, you're going to drown before the ocean boils. And so we really need to we can't look at the whole thing and get overwhelmed. We really need to say, okay, what's the thing that's most important to our institution?
Yeah. So how can we have those bite-sized pieces, break it down into parts, and then tackle those as we see fit?
Yeah. And so when you go to a place like EDUCAUSE, or if you go to another conference and you come back and you're like really inspired by a lot of different things, the real key is to kind of focus in on that thing or a couple of things and do those things that you can change in your own environment.
Good. So I think everyone listening can take that as a takeaway for themselves.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great conversation, Candice.
Thank you, Chris.